Good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Sarsour, L-I-N-D-A-S-A-R-S-O-U-R. I'm the Executive Director of the letter M, Power Change, and I'm also one of the national board members for the Women's March. We are all gathered here today, Jewish, Muslim leaders, progressive leaders, to stand in unequivocal solidarity with Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. We have circulated a letter to leaders across the country. There have been hundreds of leaders of progressive organizations, diverse organizations from around the country who also stand with us in unequivocal support of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. We are calling on Democratic leadership to show leadership in this moment by expanding the language of the resolution to include anti-Muslim bias, anti-Black racism, and xenophobia. So today we are gathered here. You're hear from a few leaders today why they support Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, why this is an important and critical moment, and to show our power as Muslim American, Jewish American, and progressive leaders. So first up, I want to introduce Nihad Awad, Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning, everyone. Nihad Awad, N-I-H-A-D, A-W-A-D, the National Executive Director of CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. This issue is very important to me because it is very personal. I am a Palestinian. My family is Palestinian. My family was forced out of its home in 1948, and they were made refugees. As a result, I was born and raised in a refugee camp in Jordan. Members of my family still lives in Palestine. They live under segregation. They are being discriminated against, and they are being treated as the invaders in their homeland. Why? Because of our U.S. foreign policy that has been blind, unconditionally supporting the occupation of Israel. Now, why are we here today? We are here to state the obvious. When a new member of Congress states the obvious, that Israel and its AIPAC lobby have undue influence in our Congress and on our foreign policy, and the Democratic leadership in the House rushes into issuing a resolution condemning this new member to silence her and intimidate her, that shows the undue influence of AIPAC and the Israel lobby in the House. Secondly, the fact that the Democratic leadership was forced to change the resolution and create balance in the resolution shows that this movement is alive and it rejects unbalanced policies in the House, in the Congress, and it shows that the resolution was unbalanced and it ignored Islamophobia and the suffering of Muslims here and abroad. Lastly, this Congress needs new faces and voices. Ilhan Omar is a dynamic, pioneer, courageous voice that has been much needed in the Congress. We need to support her. We need to show her that we love her, and the country needs voices like her. She represents her district proudly, and that voice needs to be amplified. She should not be the exception in Congress. Other members of Congress should have the courage and support the rights for the Palestinians, and they should not attempt to silence her or sideline her. Thank you very much, and I'm very proud of this leadership who is interdenominational, religious, non-religious, speaking in unity, in solidarity of Ilhan Omar.
Thank you, Nihad. Next up, I want to introduce a very dear friend of our community from an organization that has been an ally to Muslim Americans before it was cool to be an ally to Muslim Americans. Please welcome Rabbi Elisa Wise from Jewish Voice for Peace.
Hello, my name is Rabbi Elisa Wise, A-L-I-S-S-A-W-I-S-E, and I am Deputy Director at Jewish Voice for Peace. I'm proud to be here today to raise my voice and be part of this holy coalition of groups in outrage over the Democratic senior leadership seeks to reprimand Representative Omar. Representative Omar deserves no reprimand. Representative Omar was exactly right about AIPAC's outsized influence here in Washington. Representative Omar was exactly right that anti-Muslim sentiment is driving the attacks on her. Representative Omar was exactly right when she named the pressure lawmakers are under to support Israel unconditionally. Representative Omar is right. She does not deserve reprimand. Quite the opposite, she deserves our gratitude. What we have here is what we call in Judaism a chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's sacred name. In a time of rampant Islamophobia and anti-Black racism coming from the halls of power, Democratic leadership needs to be decrying Islamophobia, needs to be standing with Black Americans and not scapegoating them as they are doing with Representative Omar, in an effort to demonstrate their loyalty to Israel and to intimidate others from speaking up. This is a profound and unacceptable chilul Hashem, desecration of the sacred name. So we are here today to restore kavod, to restore honor. Of course, anti-Semitism deserves condemnation and attention, but Representative Omar said nothing anti-Semitic, and the attacks on her that suggest otherwise reek of anti-Muslim and anti-Black bias. All this leaves us vulnerable to violence and harm, because as this charade of concern of anti-Semitism is taking place, white supremacists are getting a pass. And we all know who white supremacists have in their sights: Muslims, Black people, Jews. If House Democratic leaders really cared about growing anti-Semitism, they'd be leading the charge against white supremacy in the halls of power. That's publicly fueled by our own president, by members of Congress, like Representative Jim Jordan, who tweeted Tom Steyer with the S spelled with the $sign this weekend. And they would be slamming those who put up a poster linking Representative Omar to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And this is a fight we must fight together, so that's why we are here together today. That's why any resolution brought by Pelosi and the Democratic leadership must address not only anti-Semitism, but Islamophobia, anti-Black racism, and xenophobia as well. This is how we remedy the chilul Hashem, the desecration of God's name, by standing together in praise of Representative Omar for her courage, her honesty, her truth-telling, her bravery, to stand up against those that insist Palestinians are not deserving of human rights, that we must critique the Israeli government as it practices apartheid. So thank you, Representative Omar. I am here to follow you and champion your vision of a world without racism and oppression. It is you that brings kavod, that brings honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Elisa Wise. Next up, I want to introduce to you a representative of a very courageous group of young people who have stood in support of Palestinian human rights, challenging members of the Jewish establishment on their positions on Israel. Please welcome Natalie Baum from If Not Now.
My name is Natalie Baum. I'm a member of If Not Now, a movement led by young American Jews to end our community support for the occupation. I'm standing here as an American, a Jewish woman, an Arab, and an Iranian woman, and I'm standing in full support of Representative Omar. I'm also standing here representing thousands of American Jews in every corner of this country who share Representative Omar's vision for an end to the occupation and freedom and dignity for all Palestinians and Israelis. Like many young Jews, I grew up hearing stories of persecution of my people, and I am now fearful of rising Islamophobia in this country, racism, and anti-Semitism. But for too long, my community has looked to outdated institutions and political structures to keep us safe. To those in power, denouncing Representative Omar, calling her a terrorist, threatening her, defaming her, you do not have a vision for a safe Jewish future. To those using this resolution to tear down the leadership of strong women of color, you do not have a vision for a safe Jewish future. The creation of this resolution reveals the outrageous double standard and clear moral hypocrisy happening in Congress today around the conversation of anti-Semitism. Representative Omar's words were not anti-Semitic. They reflected a valid critique of the occupation and AIPAC, which thousands of young Jews, including me, share. This resolution is about intimidating progressives, especially people of color, away from critiquing Israel's policies. By equating critique of Israel policy to anti-Semitism, this narrative distracts from real anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism that dehumanizes and tokenizes me and my people. And so I'd like to ask Speaker Pelosi and others allowing for this resolution to come to the floor. Where were you over the past years when I saw real anti-Semitism? Where were you when right-wing pundits accused George Soros of paying left-wing activists? Where were you when the President of the United States said that there were very fine people marching among Nazis in Charlottesville? Where were you when this rhetoric inspired the most deadly massacre of American Jews last year in Pittsburgh? And where were you on Monday when Representative Jordan shared a tweet that replaced the S in Tom Steyer's name with a $, making an obvious connection between his Jewish identity and clearly implying that he was buying off Democratic politicians? This resolution reinforces an age-old piece of the cycle of anti-Semitism because it lifts up Jews alone and promises Jews conditional safety by denouncing the rise of anti-Semitism. And by lifting us up alone, without our Muslim brothers and sisters and siblings, without people of color within and outside the Jewish community, it drives a wedge between us and other allies in the fight against right-wing extremism. It is a misguided ploy that will not protect us, but instead is using me and my people to punish and silence progressive leaders like Omar, who are speaking out against the occupation. Progressive leaders who are pushing the party towards a more progressive future that not only includes ending the occupation, but also includes fighting for a Green New Deal, for health care for all, an end to militarization, and dignified work so that parents can support their families. Speaker Pelosi, I care deeply about eradicating anti-Semitism, but I know enough about history to understand that Jewish safety is deeply intertwined with the safety and freedom of our Muslim siblings and people of color within and outside the Jewish community. None of us are free until all of us are free, and all of us are included in this resolution.
We promised Natalie to stay in solidarity regardless of how they try to pin us up against each other. Where was Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leadership when 11 innocent Jews were killed in the Tree of Life synagogue? We know where we were as a Muslim American community. We raised over $200,000 for the victims of the Tree of Life shooting. Next up, I would like to introduce Dr. Noura Arakat, who's a human rights attorney, Palestinian American activist here in the DMV area.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning. Noura Arakat, N-O-U-R-A-E-R-A-K-A-T, human rights attorney, assistant professor at George Mason University. I want to affirm what my brothers and sisters have said already, which is that this coalition that you see here behind you is the group that is combating anti-Semitism in this country, is the group that is leading the movement to protect all and not just a few at the expense of everyone else, where we tokenize suffering, where we hold it up in order to get votes, in order to appear that we are somehow within the mainstream and very afraid to take the risk that we need to take. The anxiety here that's being raised is not about the concern for Jewish life, but is about the concern for Israel's viability as an apartheid state, continuing and entrenching its settler colonial encroachment. And the United States has been the leader of that effort. Since 1967, the U.S. has provided more aid to Israel than all of sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America combined. It has used its veto power in the Security Council between 1967 and 2014 43 times.
to impede international accountability. It condemned the International Court of Justice when it declared the route of the apartheid wall illegal, and it is threatening to withdraw funding from the International Criminal Court because it is seeking to hold Israel to account for shooting to kill Palestinian children and adults above the waist, in their abdomens, their backs, their necks, and their heads. This is about the challenge to a U.S. liberal heterodoxy that declares Israel exceptional and out of bounds for holding it to account. And there are three things that are shaking up that heterodoxy, and they're happening here in the United States. The Democratic leadership is just out of step. Number one, the peace process has been dead, and the two-state solution is no longer viable. And if it wasn't obvious before, the Trump administration made it obvious when it moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Number two, the Netanyahu administration and Israel in general has made a significant right-wing shift that has aligned Netanyahu with authoritarian right-wing regimes, with Modi's India, with Bolsonaro's Brazil, and with Trump's America. And number three, Palestine has become unequivocally a progressive issue in this country, as has been made clear by massive grassroots support in the Women's March, in the Black Lives Matter movement, and in our presence here today. And this now here just represents that this grassroots movement is unstoppable. And so there's a duality in the attack on Representative Ilhan Omar. It represents the U.S.'s anxiety, our lawmakers' anxiety over the critique of Israel, but also its vulnerability. If you can't stop this movement from the bottom up, you're going to clamp it from the top down. And that's why we stand in unequivocal support with Representative Omar. And finally, as others have said, the only reason she is being attacked, as opposed to others who are blatantly anti-Semitic, is because she is visibly Muslim, she is black, and she is a refugee, and she dares to speak out. This is a leadership that is making her a victim in order to save face, rather than celebrating her and upholding her as our future, what it looks like and what it should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nurhagat. Can you please, at the end, we would like to introduce Shana Thomas from Ultraviolet, a leading women's organization here in the United States advocating on behalf of women's rights.
Linda, do you believe the state of Israel has a right to exist?
We'll answer questions later after the press conference.
Thank you, Linda.
My
name is Shana Thomas, SHAUNNA, THOMAS. I am really grateful to the Jewish and Muslim leaders here today who created the opportunity for me as co-founder and executive director of Ultraviolet, an organization representing over 1 million women, building power for women in every single state and congressional district across this country, who believe firmly that anti-Semitism is real and a growing problem, and we won't stop its growth by enabling Islamophobia. And that's why I'm here today to support Representative Ilhan Omar and strongly oppose the thoroughly hateful Islamophobic and misogynistic attacks lobbied against her by both Republicans and Democratic members of Congress. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, xenophobia, and misogyny are all systems of oppression that bolster each other. We need a Congress that condemns all of them. This message is being heard loud and clear. We know that there are millions of American people who have made clear that while we would easily support a resolution that denounces all of these systems of oppression and hatred, the resolution headed to the floor to condemn Representative Ilhan Omar, even just by implication, is unhelpful at best and plays directly into Republicans' bad faith arguments. I think indicative of this really incredibly disingenuous outrage and bigotry is the several years of silence in Congress before members moved to officially censure Representative Steve King, who boasted his white supremacist beliefs among timid condemnation and no action from the very same representatives who are now expressing outrage towards one of two of the first Muslim women to be elected to Congress, a Muslim woman who was expressing a legitimate concern of U.S. foreign policy. The swift introduction of this resolution, a clear response to Representative Omar, is revealing, we believe, of the misogyny, the racism, and the Islamophobia that belie U.S. politics today, which has shielded white male members of Congress from substantial criticism and accountability that they require. I think really tellingly, this resolution is backed by the likes of the President of the United States, who expressed sympathy for neo-Nazis, as we remember, who wreaked terror in the streets of Charlottesville chanting, "Jews will not replace us," in August of 2017. By bringing this resolution, the Democratic leadership would not only endorse the underlying bigotry targeting Representative Omar, but also continue to stifle an important debate on human rights as it concerns U.S. policy on Israel. We implore the Democratic leadership not to be deceived by the right's Islamophobic attacks and instead bring a real resolution that condemns all forms of hatred. Thank you.
Shana. Thank you. Next up, please help me welcome Rama Kudaimi from the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rama, R-A-M-A-H, Kudaimi, K-U-D-A-I-M-I. I'm acting director of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. Representative Ilhan Omar, the most unapologetically progressive voice we have in Congress, is not the first person to speak on Palestine. Representative Omar is not the only member of Congress to name Israel for what it is, a separate and unequal apartheid regime that controls almost every aspect of Palestinians' lives. Apartheid is more than a buzzword. Apartheid, the system that Representative Omar, Representative Betty McCollum, and people of conscience condemn, is the violent theft of Palestinian land and resources. It is racial profiling. It is the targeting of civilians. It is mass incarceration of Palestinian men and boys. It is the denial of return for 7 million Palestinian refugees. It is the military occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. And it is relegating Palestinian citizens of Israel to a second-class status in their own homeland. Representative Omar is doing no more than asserting that Palestinian rights are human rights. And yet, pro-Israel forces are trying to make an example of her due to her positionality as a black Muslim refugee woman. Her support of Palestinians is an inherent and natural part of her progressive politics. Palestinians are entitled to the same rights as the rest of humanity, and targeting leaders who assert that is inexcusable. The resolution that the Democratic leadership wanted to introduce, and the one that our voices are making them reconsider, is making it painfully obvious how out of touch they are with the truly progressive politics of their base, that necessarily include Palestinian freedom, justice, and equality, alongside issues of economic, racial, immigration, environmental, LGBTQIA, and gender justice. The real anti-Semitism and hatred are not coming from progressive leaders that are standing up for the rights of the Palestinian people. Anti-Semitism is coming from the current presidential administration and the Republican Party that have chosen to deepen their relationship with white supremacists, white nationalists, and right-wing Israeli forces that thrive on Islamophobia and racism. That is where the Democratic leadership should be focusing their attention. The fact that the Democratic leadership wanted to target Representative Omar with this resolution, instead of joining her in her principled stance against the forces of white supremacy, anti-Semitism, racism, and xenophobia, that fact called into question their belief in the values of freedom, justice, and equality for all people. By singling out Representative Omar for criticism, Speaker Pelosi is implying that attacks on Muslim, refugee women of color for their political stances are acceptable. The Democratic leadership is opening Representative Omar and anyone who looks like her up for more violence. In doing so, they are making themselves complicit in the current atmosphere of intense repression and fear, an atmosphere that is full of xenophobic, racist, Islamophobic dog whistles and shouts from the Trump administration and the GOP. We know that justice is indivisible. We believe in the possibility of freedom, justice, and equality for the Palestinian people in a world without racism and oppression. We know that all forms of oppression are interconnected and reinforce each other. And we know, and Representative Ilhan Omar knows, that work for justice for one community must be part of a vision for justice for all. That is what the Democratic leadership must understand, and that is why we stand with Ilhan Omar.
Please welcome Ahmed Badir from United Voices for America.
Good morning. I won't take much of your time. My name is Ahmed Badir, A-H-M-E-D, and the last name is B-E-D-I-E-R. I'm with United Voices. I'm proud to stand here with our Jewish brothers and sisters in solidarity with Ilhan Omar. When Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib were, when they won their election and they made history by being the first two Muslim women to join Congress, it was a historic moment that we all celebrated. While most of us celebrated, some in Washington were not happy about a Palestinian American and a Somali refugee African American joining Congress. And the smear attack started. Their mere presence in Washington angers so many people. And it's not about anti-Semitism. Let's get real. This is not about anti-Semitism because they didn't say anything anti-Semitic. What Ilhan Omar had said is nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It has to do with certain countries' influence in Washington and certain lobbies. Not much different than what we say about the NRA. Why is it okay that we can criticize and talk about the power and influence of the NRA, but we can't say the same thing about AIPAC? AIPAC, as far as we know, and from our Jewish brothers and sisters, they tell us it doesn't represent all Jews. And some are trying to redefine what anti-Semitism is, that criticism of AIPAC is now somehow anti-Semitic. We reject that. Our Jewish brothers and sisters reject that. They are not the voice of the Jewish community. They're the voice of Netanyahu, the voice of Likud, the voice of the right wing. And if Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leadership wants to align themselves with extreme right-wing parties around the world, well, I don't think that was their mandate when they came to Washington, D.C. Their mandate when to come to Washington, D.C. was to make the lives of the average American better, to hold the White House accountable. And it's a shame that we see week after week that members of Congress, especially on the Democratic side, are using their time and their resources, or misusing it, to go after Ilhan Omar, the first Muslim woman in Congress. Again, this is not about anti-Semitism. This has to do everything with a person's right to be able to criticize. Ilhan Omar sits on the Foreign Relations Committee. As a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, she has every right to speak about foreign relations. That's right. And if there's a country that doesn't have and serve the interests of the United States, in her opinion, she should be able to speak about that without having to be silenced. There was an important quote by a member of AIPAC in the New York Times the other day, saying that in a few years from now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib will no longer be in Congress, that they're basically going to work to remove them because they don't like their voice. They don't like what they have to say. So this has nothing to do with Semitism or anti-Semitism. Thank you very much. After this, we're looking forward to going to Nancy Pelosi's office to support our letter, to deliver our letter, and to continue to make our voice heard. Thank you so much.
Can I have two folks come up together real quickly before Osama? This is Phyllis Bennis. She's also recently wrote a piece of The Nation in support of Ilhan, one of our Jewish allies and public scholars.
Very briefly, my name is Phyllis Bennis, P-H-Y-L-L-I-S, B like boy, E-N-N-I-S, from the Institute for Policy Studies. I want to say just two things. One is I was sitting just a few feet away from Ilhan Omar the other night at Busboys and Poets. There was nothing anti-Semitic in what she said. She is being blamed for anti-Semitism she did not say, for words she never said, for beliefs she doesn't hold. That's what we're dealing with. The only other point I want to make is that we are at a moment of extraordinary transition. We are transitioning from the assumption of public discourse, the assumption of the media, that support for Israel is a necessity for everyone in Congress, for everyone in the media, and for every person in this country. That is no longer the case. And what we're facing now is that moment of transition where public opinion is shifting, the media coverage is shifting, and unfortunately people in this town seem to think that we are back 30 years ago when they believed it was political suicide to criticize Israel. It is not. It wasn't then, but it doesn't matter. What matters is now. It is no longer political suicide to criticize Israel. We now see it on college campuses. We see it in the streets. We see it in how people talk about the issue. We see it in the media. And this is the change that is underway, and it's part of the change that has brought extraordinary people to Congress, like Representative Ilhan Omar, like Representative Rashida Tlaib, like representatives that we have heard about all day. This is an incredible generational shift. It's an incredible political shift, and we should be celebrating it. This is really a great moment.
Please welcome Mr. Osama Bush from American Muslims for Palestine.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning. My name is Osama Bush, Osamaa-Aburshid. I'm the Executive Director of the American Muslims for Palestine. I just want to echo what was said before. This is not about Semitism and anti-Semitism, but what we're seeing now is a tool of intimidation. Anti-Semitism became a tool of intimidation to deter any free, constructive, healthy discussion about Israel and its policies and the influence of the Israel lobby in the United States. So it is not about being against Jews, because none of us here is against Jews. It's not being against Israel as a state. It's about its policies and what it's doing in the name of Judaism. You know, our friends were asking, where do we stand in relation to atrocities committed in the name of Islam and Muslims? Let me tell you where we stand. As a Palestinian, as an Arab, as a Muslim, we did condemn the atrocities that are committed by Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And we did not call ourselves and did not call any non-Muslims who condemn Saudi Arabia's actions in Yemen Islamophobic. We do not condemn anyone who condemned Iran's atrocities in Syria as Islamophobic. And when we Muslims spoke against Saudi Arabia and Iran, we did not see ourselves as self-hating Muslims, because Saudi Arabia and Iran do not represent Islam. Israel and the Israeli lobby do not represent Judaism. And when Jews come and speak about the atrocities committed in the name of Judaism, that does not make them self-hating Jews. So we should not accept this premise that anti-Semitism applies.
Should I die? I received death threats.
So again, I'm a Semitic person too. And again, we stand against anti-Semitism, against bigotry in its all forms, and against oppression that is being committed in the name of Judaism, while Judaism is innocent of any crimes that being inflicted on the Palestinian people or any people. So we condemn all forms of aggression, and we're here to stand not only with Ilhan Omar. Let me say this. You have no right to infringe on our constitutionally protected rights in this country. Not Congress, not anyone, not the democratic leadership. They have no right to infringe on our rights. Israel is not a taboo. And if the Democrats want to follow the example of Donald Trump, who they criticize days and nights, well, let me tell you this. Donald Trump called the Democrats treasonous because they did not clap enough for him during his State of the Union speech. So now the Democrats are following suit by creating another taboo. And if we will continue on this trajectory and on this path, America will not be the America that we love and the America that we want. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to give a shout out to our Jews of Color, Jaywalk, who's here with us today. We have the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. We also have the Muslim American Society here. We have allies who have joined us, and we are very proud leaders of the Women's March here locally in Washington, D.C. Right now, we are going to take a walk to Nancy Pelosi's office to deliver this letter in person, and we'll be visiting and making sure and building the morale of the staffs of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. We want to end this press conference by saying that we unequivocally stand with Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Congresswoman Rashida, that there is a generational shift, that we are here to stay. We will not be silenced. We will not be intimidated. And we will continue to ensure that this Constitution upholds our right to engage in freedom of speech. And that includes the criticism of the State of Israel as it commits atrocities against the Palestinian people. And we ask the Democratic leadership to engage in an act of leadership by keeping us united as we go ahead into 2020, that the right is literally playing a game to divide us and fracture our movement so that we lose this White House one more time to fascists and the Donald Trump administration. We here say no. We are Jews, we are Muslims, we are atheists, we are Latinx, we are African American, we are people of diverse backgrounds, and we reject that. So let's go right now. Since we've been delayed, we're going now to Nancy Pelosi's office.